Charles Gaëtan Xavier-Luc Duval.
Merci. Mr. Speaker, I listened obviously carefully to what the Minister had to say. He expressed some self-satisfaction, I think, on the reforms and improvements to the procedures at the NTLA. Unfortunately, I am in a process of buying a car. It took me 2 weeks, and I just got the number today. It took me 2 weeks to register the sale and the purchase and to affix a new number to the car. It was very, very frustrating, and I feel very sorry for my fellow citizens having to go through the same issue. So no doubt it is still work in progress, and Mr. Minister, I'm sure you will have a lot of work still left to get this sorted out. As far as road accidents are concerned, Mr. Speaker, the 67 deaths in the first 6 months of this year are tragic road accidents involving mainly motorcyclists, cyclists, and pedestrians. And these people are often tragic victims of these accidents. It is a fact that driving, walking, riding on our roads in Mauritius are extremely hazardous. If we try and drive overseas, I'm sure you'll find it's much easier to drive overseas than it is to drive and use our roads in Mauritius. The government response, imperfect as it may be, is to increase the fines. But as rightly said by Honourable Litim just now, many of these changes don't relate to safety. They relate to administration of the Act, which has nothing to do with safety. So that is something, therefore, that is surprising. But the real question that remains is, what is the point of imposing a fine? The point of imposing a fine is to create a deterrence, to deter people from doing it again. I'll take you a little example as far as deterrence is concerned. My neighbor, who is a gardener, he was riding his motorcycle without the vest, and he was fined 5,000 rupees. That is a disaster for him. He was destroyed by that fine, and he had to find the money, being nearly a quarter of his salary, to pay for this fine. But the same 5,000 rupees that is charged to someone much richer will have no effect. He will just pay it and forget it. So this issue of deterrence has been dealt with in other countries successfully. And this is the main point of my speech, the first point of my speech this afternoon, this evening, is to see how we can make our fines more of a deterrence to people who misuse our roads, Mr. Speaker. Now, how have other countries dealt with this? They've dealt with this in a very ingenious way, and many countries have done this. And I'm talking about Finland, the UK, Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Greece. Australia is considering this. What have they done? They've actually linked the fine to the income of the individual. There's a minimum fine, and apart from the minimum fine, the judge, the magistrate, will fine the driver or the rider, whatever it is, up to an amount which relates to his monthly income. For instance, in Norway, you can be fined up to 10% of your annual income. That is a lot. You're fined if you make a traffic offense. For certain offenses, you can be fined up to 10% of your annual income. And believe me, if you pay a fine, which is 10% of your annual income, you're not going to do that silly thing again. You're going to stop. That is a deterrent. Mr. Speaker, in Greece, poor persons pay a fine, and rich persons can pay up to 3 times that fine. In the UK, there are obviously same maximum limits. In the UK, it is 175% of your weekly income. The traffic offense can be sanctioned by a fine of nearly twice your weekly income. Now that is a deterrent. My issue, Mr. Speaker, is whatever level of fine that we see in these issues, it is very unfair. It is hugely burdensome on poor people. I take the gardener, 5,000 rupees, not wearing a vest. It is still 5,000 rupees as we speak today. It is a disaster for him. He may not be able to feed his family properly. He may not be able to pay his rent. But the same offense perpetrated by someone who's much richer, say a member of this assembly, if ever they get fined, they don't even care because it's only 5,000 rupees. So my point, Mr. Speaker, my plea, in fact, is that fines must be a deterrent, and for them to be a deterrent, they must hurt. Otherwise, it is not it's no point in having the fine. And therefore, they cannot just hurt the poor, they must hurt the rich as well, and they must be therefore related to the annual income, to the income of the person having, to the perpetrator, Mr. Speaker. So this is the first point that I wanted to make. Also, Mr. Speaker, there are some of these fines. I mean, it's not right. I mean, I think item 42 of the schedule, failing to display an insurance vignette, not failing not to have an insurance vignette, just failing not to display the insurance vignette, 5,000 rupees. Now, is that fair? How fair can it be that just for not having the little vignette, you have the insurance, you don't have the vignette, the police officer will fine you 5,000 rupees. So what I'm saying is the whole schedule has to be looked at again. There are things that still remain in that schedule which I consider to be extremely unfair. Also, Mr. Speaker, there are some fines which relate purely to economic activity. Now, touting, I suppose finding a client for your taxi, that is what touting is all about, was going to change from 500 rupees to 2,000 rupees. Now it's back to 1,000 rupees. That is an economic offense. Nothing to do with safety. Taxi marron, Mr. Speaker, we all feel for taxi marron. Because, believe it or not, the issue of taxi licenses has never been based on meritocracy. It has never been based on meritocracy. It's always been based on who you know. And if you're a taxi marron, it's not your own fault. You would like to have a taxi license. You can't get a taxi license. You feed your family by being a taxi marron, and the fine goes now from 3,000 rupees to 5,000 rupees. Imagine a taxi marron, Mr. Speaker, getting free of these fines in a month. How destructive it is to his family. I am against, Mr. Speaker, increasing these fines where we relate merely to economic offenses. I don't actually mind a fine going from 500 rupees to 1,000 rupees, because the fine of 500 rupees is no fine at all. It's pointless. Who is going to give a ticket to someone for 500 rupees? I don't mind if it goes to 1,000 rupees. But, Mr. Speaker, these economic fines for these economic offenses, I am very much against increasing them as some of them are being increased this time, because it is unfair to the poorest sections of our society, who often, through no fault of their own, have to act within the boundary, just outside the boundaries of the law. Mr. Speaker, also I'd like to mention this issue of having to pay the fine in person. Now imagine this gardener again. He has 5,000 rupee fine, and he has to lose one day's work just to go to court to pay, because he cannot pay by juice, he cannot pay by Blink or something, and he cannot even send his wife to pay. He has to go to pay in person. That is, Mr. Speaker, something that ought to be changed. But accidents, Mr. Speaker, are not just a question of drivers and riders, etc. Mr. Speaker, I've raised in this House before the sad lack of payments on our roads. And I was actually astonished. Budget after budget, we talk about roads, we talk about bridges, we talk about all this, and nobody gives a hoot about pedestrians, people walking. Have you actually seen pedestrians walking? They have to dodge the cars that come by, they have to dodge the buses that come by, some have to jump in the canal just to avoid the bus. And this is the case in many roads in my constituency. It's the case also in many roads around Mauritius. It is a highly dangerous issue, highly dangerous activity to be a pedestrian in Mauritius. And the figures show. But I think the minister said that 26%, if I get the right figure, of the accidents were actually pedestrian. Why? Why? Because this is a country without pavements, Mr. Speaker. That is why. This is why nobody seems to realize that or say that. It's a country without pavements. And a country without pavements, you get pedestrians that get killed because they are sharing the road with motorcyclists. They are sharing the same road with the drivers, with the cars, with the buses. We will never, ever, ever, whichever fine you put, we will never, ever be able to stop pedestrians being killed on our roads without pavements. Never. And this must be the priority of the government, to construct pavements wherever it is still possible. In many places, I'm sure, it is no longer possible because there have been constructions on both sides of the road. But in many, many other places, it is possible. And I plead, Mr. Speaker, it's not in the budget, but I plead that pavements be included as a priority for road safety, as a priority. And the second thing, Mr. Speaker, are these motorcycles. Now, up in the north where I live, you always see motorcycles going by. Many of them don't have number plates. Many of them don't have number plates. The police cannot do anything. They do not do anything. Many of them do not even have, they have modified their silencers. The fine for not having a silencer is 5,000 rupees. Does it work? Have you noticed the number of motorcycles going around in Cattlebone, in my constituency, anywhere else without silencers? Why doesn't it work? Because the police are not enforcing it. They're not enforcing it because they cannot catch these motorcycles. They sit on the side of the road, they will stop anyone who's willing to stop. If a motorcycle doesn't want to stop, especially if it doesn't have a number, the police just let it go by. They have no way to stop it. The safety cameras cannot catch, there's no number. The speeding cameras cannot catch, there's no number. And these motorcycles are multiplying. What, they like mushrooms? I don't know what people like rabbits in Mauritius, Mr. Speaker. Multiplying. And it's becoming a real danger, and no doubt being used by drug traffickers, no doubt being used by other youth without licenses. And I'd like to hear from the Minister of Transport. What is he going to do about these motorcycles? What is the police just going to sit by and let this happen? And they have a real danger. 16%, according to the Minister, of motorcycle riders that were involved in accidents did not have a license. 16% of these users of motorcycles, if we extrapolate, don't have a license. And yet what are we going to do about it? And that is, Mr. Speaker, the few points that I wanted to raise. I think that the whole issue of traffic is not just a question of fines, otherwise we wouldn't have motorcycles with modified silencers. It is also, and especially with regard to enforcement. If we do not enforce it properly, then whatever we are voting here, it's not going to make any difference. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.